Hello, dear viewers. Support me by subscribing to my channel and share my video if you like it. And also, make sure you comment your thoughts. Now let's start the video. Edmure. They were all going to die. He cursed himself for being a fool. They were all going to die, and it was all his fault, because he hadn't listened. Hadn't listened to Father, who had tried to talk to him about basic military matters. Hadn't listened to Uncle Brandon, who had talked about scouting and ranging during his various visits to River Run. And he hadn't listened to Kat, who had told him that it was time to give up playing about and take being the heir to River Run seriously. He looked down the hill as the sun set. The good news was that they'd made it to High Heart before the mob of Faith Militant-inspired small folk. The bad news was that he'd sent too many of his men off in ranges to either side to secure various points and try and get more help from various holdfasts. Because if he hadn't behaved like a blithering idiot, then he'd have more than the 50 men he had with him now, on top of a high hill that was too steep to mount a proper mounted charge on, facing a mob of at least 500 small folk. Odds of 10 to 1. Normally 50 well-armed and well-armored men, on good horses, against a mob of even that number would break them in one charge. Maybe two. However, they required level ground, and they needed the mob to not be holding torches that might make even war horses shy. Yes, he was an idiot. If he made it out of here alive, then he'd make up for it all by pestering Father for every scrap of information about strategy, tactics, and the other bits of warfare, no matter how niggling and foolish, and then he'd track down Uncle Brendan. Where in the name of the seven hells was he, and do the same with him? He chewed a lip for a moment. Perhaps Kat's son Bran would be less of an idiot when he inherited River Run. No more Tullys. Tully blood would hold River Run, but not the Tully name, because of him. Yes, he was an idiot. A knot of torches started to move up the hill, and he sighed. Well, at least there would be a parley, and they might get lucky. Small folk were not trained soldiers. If they did attack, then it would be bloody. Serdmure! There's a parley coming. I know, Tamien, he replied quietly. I see them. Have the men stand ready. Aye, Serdmure. Timon? Tell the men that should we prevail, then I'll buy them a barrel of Arbor gold. I shall Serdmure. He stared to walk off and then stopped. Serdmure? Aye, Timon. Honored to serve, Serdmure. Thank you. And with that he walked down the slope to meet the parley, with Timon and a few others joining him. They had torches as well, and as they walked he heard the snap and boom of the banner on the hill behind him. As the wind took it, the last of the sunlight illuminated the group coming towards him, but as he looked he cursed under his breath. The small folk were being led by a septon. Not just any septon, but that bloody septon, the one they called Blackfoot. He was dressed in a shapeless robe, his bare feet were filthy, and his hair was disheveled. And as he approached he saw a beatific smile on his face, and the look of madness in his eyes. Oh yes, this one was trouble. Serdmure, the septon said in the gathering gloom. What an unexpected pleasure. Blackfoot, he replied, and as he said the word the smile slipped for an instant on the face of the septon. What do you want? My people call me the High Sparrow. Your people? So you lead them then? I minister to their needs, I provide spiritual guidance. So you're now moving from that to arson and murder? I seek the death of no one, Serdmure. I will raise my hand to no one. He glared at the wretched man and the men behind him, with their pathetic attempt at armor and their rusty weapons. No, but you'll allow others to take up arms against those you see as your enemies. I see that as clear as day. Blackfoot looked at him. It was a slightly surprised look, as if he was startled that Edmure had said something so pertinent. We are here for a most noble cause. We are here on the behest of the Seven. Would you stand in our way? You are here to burn this hill and those stumps to the ground at night, providing a sign that all for miles around can see that you will destroy all signs of the first men, and that I will not allow. The stumps are symbols of false gods, Blackfoot said piously. Evil and false. It is the duty of all who follow the Seven to confront and chastise such false gods. Those who stand behind me represent the small folk. Would you really stand against them? He took a measured step forwards. It was increasingly dark now, with just the torches providing light. I would. You do not seek to confront false gods. You seek to raise the banner of the faith militant. And the king will not allow it. Neither will my father, and neither will I. What's next after those stumps? The heart trees at places like Reventry Hall? And then, will it be men and women next? There are still those who worship the old gods here in the Riverlands. Would you burn them out? Kill them? Set them on fire? Where's the evil then? The small folk do not worship the false gods. Not all of them, but some of them, and who here heard the call? Blackfoot narrowed his eyes a little. It seemed that the conversation was not going the way that he had anticipated. This call, a call to worship false gods, methinks. If it happened, and even if it did, your good brother sent it out. He worships the false gods. Many do. Would you burn them as well? Would you have the North descend on the Riverlands? On you? No. It wouldn't be you, it would be on others. You want power. I see it in your eyes. You seek to dominate. There was a long pause as they both stared at each other in the light of the torches. Blackfoot smiled a grim and terrible smile at him. Satamura, move your men or we will take this hill. By force if we have to, but we will take it. And scorch it. You can try, said a very familiar voice to one side. He looked to one side, too surprised to speak. But you'll not succeed. You can burn each and every stump, but they won't die. Uncle Brynden. Edmure. The blackfish emerged out of the darkness. He seemed a bit different, as if the gray at his temples was less prominent, and he had oddly shaped cloak pins on each side of his neck. To his left was a blonde woman with one hand gripping the pommel of a sword, and on his right was a tall old man in dark robes, with something on a hood. You keep interesting company, nephew. Unwelcome company, Edmure growled. There were others in the darkness behind his uncle, and he felt his heart lift a little. You heard why they are here. Aye, said the old man. We heard. And it will not stand. As Sir Brynden said, burning the trees will never get rid of them. They were cut down years ago, but the stumps still stand. Why would that be? Puzzled, he looked at the man. I don't understand. Uncle Brynden sent him a slightly exasperated look. They have deep roots, Edmure, deeper roots than you might think. Then he glared at Blackfoot, and far deeper than in your worst nightmares. Hello again, Septon. We meet again. Your men failed at the God's Eye. Did you think to succeed here? Blackfoot stared at the blackfish, and then smiled slightly. The knight and the woman at the village. Of course, you rode away from our great and holy task. A task that we ended, the old man said grimly. He stepped forwards, tugging at his hood, so that it came up. As it did, Edmure could see horns suddenly sprouting on either side of the old man's head. He stared, transfixed. No, surely not. Blackfoot also seemed to be stunned. No, he said eventually. This cannot be. Your kind has gone from this world. There are no green men. The old man smiled a strange and terrible smile. You were wrong. You were looking in the wrong places. Then you are all pagans and we will end you. Blackfoot snarled. I see what you are. I see what you are all too clearly. You see, do you? The old man said the words softly. He paused as if he was listening to something. Tell me, what do you see now? I see you and... what? Relight those torches, you fools. Relight them. Edmure stared at the man in confusion, as did Blackfoot's men. High Sparrow, the torches are still lit. We did not douse them. Fool! Of course you did. Why else would it be so dark so suddenly? And then the Septon staggered a little as he looked about. The stars? Where are the stars? And in that moment Edmure saw that the eyes of the Septon were now pure white. He looked at the old man, who was now staring at the terrified men standing behind the Septon. Punishment for his crimes, he said. Tell those below to go home. There was a long moment, and then Blackfoot's men broke and ran, running for the crowd at the bottom of the hill, screaming at them to go, to flee, that the High Sparrow had been blinded by the old gods. Flee, flee. Tyrion! If he survived this trip and ever returned to Casterly Rock, he'd have to tell Father a few things about Ned Stark, namely that the man could march at a truly brutal speed, and at the same time get his men to ride at that same speed. He looked at him now, at the head of the column of men, the huge direwolf loping effortlessly at his side. Father had often described Ned Stark as being an honorable fool. Father, to be honest, didn't know what he was talking about in this case. Ned Stark was not a fool. It was just that he was the lord that the North needed. He commanded the North in a way that few others could. Father would not do well in this cold, harsh, but oddly beautiful place. It wasn't really a place for much artifice or dissemblance, because such things could get you killed at some point if you were not very lucky. No, the North was a place where you kept your friends close and your enemies even closer. He didn't want to imagine what winter would be like up here. Bone-chilling beyond his worst nightmares, no doubt. And someone like Ned Stark had the kind of standards of boneheaded, honorably noble behavior that made him appallingly popular. Father would be roundly hated up here, and would probably have controlled things with a rod of iron before having that rod wrapped around his neck and then be tied to a large rock so that he could be kicked into the nearest lake. Ned Stark's traveling speed also meant that he was a military threat should he and Father ever fight each other, and he really wasn't sure who would win that little fight. Father's campaigns tended to be brutally direct. Ned Stark, on the other hand, seemed to fight with no amount of cunning. And from what he had overheard when it came to Ned and Robb Stark discussing tactics and strategy, Robb Stark was even better, which made no sense whatsoever, given the age of the boy. No, he was missing something. He was missing something about the boy's companions as well. Theon Greyjoy, according to his sources, had once been an arrogant little prick who clung to being an Ironborn like some children clung to their toys. Well, that description was no true of the grave young man who was riding in front of him now, one hand tickling the ears of his alert little direwolf. The Greyjoy boy was, well, he was a man of the North now. He was wearing a plain doublet, and he prayed every day to the old gods. Why? What had happened? As for Jon Stark, the former bastard of Winterfell, well, the lad had a grave demeanor at the best of times, as if he was always a bit weighed down by something, which was interesting. No one knew who his mother was of his father. There could be no question, he looked more like a Stark than Robb Stark did, but there was something mysterious there. There had always been those stories about the great tournament at Harrenhal, the last flash of light before darkness fell on the Targaryens, where apparently Ashara Dane had made the young Ned Stark blush. Had it been anything more than a blush? He didn't know. He had a lot of fun guessing, though. He could see that a rider was approaching ahead of them and reined in as Ned Stark raised a clenched, gauntleted fist in the air. Slow, the Lord of the North shouted, "Walk!" "Riders on the road ahead, my lord," he heard the rider gasp out. "They bear the banners of the Carhold." "Karstarks, then? I thought that we might meet them." Great John Umber boomed. Then he looked at Lord Stark. "Cheer up, Ned. He's your bloody cousin." "Distant cousin," Ned Stark muttered, with a few marriage alliances back and forwards in the past, loyal but dour. "Scratch a Karstark and you'll find a Stark," Rose Bolton said to the other side of him, and there was a mutter of laughter. "Aye, right enough," sighed Ned Stark before raising his hand again and then bringing it down forwards to signify a canter. "Ride!" They soon caught up to the other party on the road ahead, who had obviously seen their banners and then dismounted. As they drew level and reined in, the entire Karstark party dropped to one knee, sending the odd incredulous glance at the motionless figure of Frostfire. Lord Stark, a large raw-boned man, older than the Great John and with a bigger beard, intoned. "The Stark in Winterfell House Karstark of the Carhold stands ready. The long night comes. Command us." "Rise, Lord Karstark," Ned Stark said as he dismounted, before smiling and embracing the older man. "Well, Ned, we have much to talk about." He tilted his head at the direwolf, including her. "Aye," Lord Karstark rumbled. "Aye, we do. I've brought my sons. All three of them." The call was strong at the Karsleifs. Hearing a slight babble of voices, Tyrion turned to see that three younger men were talking enthusiastically with Robb and Jon Stark, as well as the Greyjoy boy. After a moment, the Karstarks remounted. The column somehow shook itself into some kind of shape, and they restarted their ride north, hard and relentless. The Karstarks seemed to be quite familiar with the speed and intensity of Ned Stark. And then they crested a hill and slowed, and the word came through for Tyrion to ride to the head of the column. He spurred his horse on and then reined in as he approached Ned Stark, who was leaning against the pommel of his horse and staring north. The moment he noticed him, he smiled slightly. "There you go, our destination." Confused, he stared ahead of them. Fields, yes. The road, yes. Hills up ahead to one side. Yes. Wait. There was a gleam of something almost white-blue far ahead. "Is that the wall?" He asked the question hesitantly. "Aye, that's it." Ned Stark said, the words with a slight sigh. "That's the wall." He thought about saying something like, "Will we be there by this afternoon, before my arse becomes one giant blister," but he restrained himself. Instead he asked, "When shall we get there?" Tomorrow, Ned Stark grunted, before looked at him and smiling a little. Yes, it's that damn big. By all the gods, Tyrion muttered as he stared north. It's huge. Aye, Ned Stark replied, and our best defense against what lies on the other side. My lords, ride. And with they were off again. The wall awaited, as did a cushion for his arse. Victarion. He was in a foul mood as he walked into the castle at Pike. The weather matched his mood, damp and wet. And this was to be a meeting that he was not going to enjoy. He could tell that straight away. Well, they had to be told the truth, because it was all their bloody fault. The fools. Guards took one look at his face and either stiffened to attention or got out of his way as quickly as possible, almost scuttling like crabs. Good. He was in no mood to be stopped, diverted or asked by some sniveling underling asking what he was doing there. He found his brother and his solar, Balon Greyjoy, was sitting in his usual chair, staring at the fire that was burning in the hearth. Danfair was standing next to him, and they were having a subdued conversation. One that stopped the moment that they both noticed his arrival. It wasn't hard as he slammed the door closed behind him. Victor, what you want here? I did not send for you. He looked his brother in the eye. I came to report on the status of the Iron Fleet, because you need to hear this from me. We now have a third of the ships that we had yesterday. There was a stunned silence, and then Balon came out of his chair as if someone had just set fire to his arse. What? I said that the Iron Fleet now has just a third of the strength it had yesterday. 2/3 of it have sailed away. Balon stared at him. Sailed away? Sailed away where? Victarion? What in the name of the drowned god has happened? You happened, you idiot. The words were on the tip of his tongue, but he swallowed them. A message came from Harlaw, and another one from Great Walk. Those captains and crew from those 2 islands sailed as soon as they heard it. Balon and Danfair looked at each other. They seemed startled by the names of the islands, as if this was something that they had not anticipated. What message? He fixed them both with his best glare. That they were betrayed. That you had attacked Harlaw and would attack Great Waking. Next, that you were purging the Iron Islands of everyone that claimed to have heard the call, and that you denied the call. Denied help for Winterfell. Denied help for the Wall. Balon exchanged another look with Danfair, the latter baring his teeth in a silent snarl of rage. Not all the captains and crew were from those 2 islands, though. Balon said eventually, No, but do you really think that all those who heard the call came from those islands? Don't be a fool, brother, and do not dare tell me that it was all Greenlander mummery. You insult me with those words. I was at sea when I heard it. At sea, no mummery there. I heard it. Danfair clenched his fists in rage. Nonsense, mummery and foolishness. The drowned god told me that... I don't care what the drowned god says. Victarion roared with a fury that surprised him. The Iron Fleet that we have spent so long building is gone, reduced to a fraction of what it had been. The ships have sailed for their home islands. The men will not obey you, not until they feel safe again. Balon was staring at him as if he had gone raving mad. I am the Lord of the Iron Islands, he shouted eventually. This is my dominion, my islands. This is rebellion. No, this is you not listening to your own people, Victarion shouted back. He was angrier than he had ever been, angrier with both his brothers for their mishandling of this whole matter, angry with them for thinking that this could be controlled with their usual lack of tact. You have not even sent a raven to Winterfell asking what is going on. You simply declared the whole thing to be a Greenlander lie, and then killing people who disagreed with you. And that is beyond foolish. Who else will you kill? 12, 100, 1,000, 10,000? The call was heard. It cannot be unheard. The other 2 men in the room were both pale now. Balon from shock and Danfair from what looked like fury. The latter broke the silence. The drowned god denied this call to me. Our god, the god of the Iron Islands. Would you have me deny him? We stand by the Iron Price and the old way. And in the meantime, the Iron Fleet is weakened. We are weakened. This is war now, brothers. The only way that this can end is for Ironborn to kill Ironborn. His words caused a silence, one that was broken by a timid knock on the door. What is it? Balon snarled, and the door opened to reveal Master Colin, looking old and frail and pale. He was holding a scrap of paper that looked as if it had come via a raven. My lord, the old master quavered. A message from Lord Harlaw. He handed it over and then almost fled. Balin unrolled the message and then stared at it, with Damfair reading it over his shoulder, before throwing it onto the table with a foul oath. Victarion snatched it up quickly. If you send reavers against reavers, then you must pay your own price. We who heard the call will send help to Winterfell. Tell Damfair that I have read the runes and know the truth about his mad god. We do not follow him now. He looked up. Balin was sitting in his chair again, whilst Damfair was staring at the message. He had gone a strange blotchy color about the face, whilst his mouth worked in what was either prayer or something that he just couldn't make out. Mad god. Lies, Damfair muttered in a low and terrible voice. Lies, Victarion? Yes? Take your fleet and burn Harlaw to the ground. Raise the island. Salt the ground and tear down the buildings. Start with High Harlaw. He stared at the drowned man. I do not take orders from you, he said softly. I take orders from our brother, the Lord of the Iron Laxlands, and such orders would not make things better, but far worse. If Harlaw has read the heresy within the runes that had been long thought destroyed, then he must die. They must all die. The drowned god is all. He looked into the eyes of the man who had once been his favorite brother and saw the madness that dwelt within. Balin, brother, this is madness. What else can we do? Balin asked, and he could hear the despair in his voice. Harlaw stands against me. Against us. So what else can we do? He would rebel against us. He would listen to Winterfell first, rather than Pike, and me. We must break him. Him and these other rebels. We are Ironborn. There can be no other way. Brother, there can be no argument about this. Balin slammed his fist down on the arm of his chair. No debate. We have to hold to the drowned god. Without him, we are nothing. All these islands hold is iron. We have no wood, little land for crops. We harvest the sea, but we cannot get everything from there. Trading is weak. We have always taken what we need. We need to do that again. The drowned god commanded us to do so. Without him, Balin paused and seemed to search for words that hurt his lips. Without him, we are just a band of men on barren islands who have nothing but iron. The drowned god unites us. If Harlaw denies the drowned god, then Harlaw must die. There can be no other way. He stared at his brother. He knew that he himself was not much of a thinker, but there seemed to be some gaping holes in Balin's logic. If we burn High Harlaw and salt the island, will that not also weaken us? The Lord of the Iron Islands stared into the fire. We are Ironborn. What is dead may never die, but rises again, harder and stronger. Harlaw will recover. Eventually, he looked at Victarion. This is my Castamere. This will strengthen us, eventually. Go! Do as our brother said. Victarion closed his eyes for a long moment, and then sighed. Very well. I disagree, but you are my oldest brother, and also Lord of the Iron Islands. I will obey. He turned to Damfair. Look at me, priest. I might die obeying your command, but if I return, then I will spit in your face and tell you that it wasn't worth it. And then describe the faces all of the men, women, and children you had me kill. So look at me. But Damfair would not. He had closed his eyes again and was praying. Victarion stared at him for a long moment, and then at Balin, who was staring at the fire again, and then turned on his heel and strode from the solar. He knew that his brothers were cleverer than him. He knew that he was not a thinker, merely a fighter, but for the first time in his life he knew something else. That his brothers were making a terrible mistake, and that there was nothing he could do to stop them. Well, Highgarden had to be his favorite place in the world at times. So many trees, so many flowers, the view over the landscape. It wasn't until you looked harder that you saw the strength of the position, the walls, the towers, the thorn hedge, the river. This was a place that had been chosen for a reason. It was strong. There was a reason why the Andals had looked on this place and recoiled. Highgarden was old and strong. He needed to be worthy of it, and that was the hard part. He felt as if he was trying to play catch-up. Father's advisors seemed to be nothing more than idiots who liked to flatter. He's already told Free that their services were no longer required. They'd looked down their noses at him and then asked pointed questions about when Father was returning, only to be told that he was hunting for the foreseeable future, and that if they asked that question any more times, his patience would start to wear a little thin. Any who had pushed their luck any more had been told to go away at once. and Maester Lomas was skating on some very thin ice at the moment, with all his protestations of loyalty to the head of House Tyrell. Willis sighed and returned to his desk, which was already piled high with things to do. His recent takeover of the Reach had largely stunned his brothers. Margaery was fine with it, but Garland was still a bit stunned, although he suspected that there were deeper waters to him than there first appeared. And then there was Loras. He needed to have a word with Loras. No, wait. First, he needed to talk to grandmother about Loras, and then he needed to talk to Loras. The boy was complicated. He was proud, prickly, intelligent about some things, an idiot about other things. A brilliant rider, a superb jouster, and above all else, someone who needed to be restrained before he did something stupid. Right now, he wanted to return to King's Landing. That was indeed something stupid, because Willis knew exactly why. The poor foolish boy was in love for the first real time in his life with Renly Baratheon. This would have to be handled delicately. He did not want to hurt his brother's feelings, but this was not something that could be allowed to run its course. This was something that had to be delicately pinched out, like a bud on the wrong place of the stem of a rose. Now was not the time for this. He had good intelligence from King's Landing that Jon Arryn was looking for a bride for Renly, as Storm's End needed an heir for its lord. That part was none of his business, although that bride had better not be Arianne Martell, unlikely. She was the heir to Sunspear, or any of the Sand Snakes, should they ever be legitimized. No, a girl from the Stormlands would suffice. Which left Rosier. He really needed grandmother's advice on this. Loras needed some kind, quiet girl who would bear him children and not make him miserable. Grandmother had to know someone who fitted that. And then, well, they'd have that conversation when it was time to cross that bridge. Knuckles rapped against the door, and he looked up. Lord Tarley is here to see you, Lord Willis, a guard said formally. Him and his son. Aha! Send them in, please, Wellis said as he straightened up. The two Tarleys strode in, one lean and the other, well, fat. What was interesting was that there was a bit more steel in the spine of young Sam Tarley. Interesting. Thank you both for coming, he greeted them. Please, be seated. They sat, and he pulled his chair in and was also seated. Lord Taxley, he said abruptly, I have need of your expertise. You and your son both heard the call. You know that Winterfell calls for aid. It is the nature of that aid that concerns me. The Reach is rich in many things, in food, in wine, in strength of arms. I would use those things wisely. Now, word has reached me from the Citadel that the Maesters are currently hotly debating if, Willis took a deep breath, if a long winter is coming, as in the legends of the long winter. That lends much credence to the call. Lord Turley, you are a veteran of many a fight. Many a war. You've been to the north before. You know what it's like there. The older bald man nodded somberly at him. I would have you go there again, go to Winterfell and find out just what is coming and how it can be fought. If the others are indeed coming, if they are not a thing out of legend, then we need to know how legends can be killed. Rangiel Tarley nodded again, a gleam in his eye. I can do that. House Tarley has always supported the Night's Watch. Samwell Tarley twitched a bit at that, his eyes rolling a little as he looked sidelong at his father, and Wellis wondered again if the rumors about Randiel Tarley mulling over sending his son to the wall were true. Probably. The boy was about as martial as a pat of butter, but that did not mean that he didn't have his uses. I also have need of your son, Samwell. You found Otherbane. I would have you find out more things. Highgarden has a large library. It's one that our maester here says contains very little about magic or legends or the information that we need. There's another kind of battle here, one for information. I need a warrior of the mind, not of the body. For this, will you help me? Of course, my lord, Sam Tarley said intently. I'll help in any way I can. Willis nodded, noting the odd look that Lord Tarley sent his son. Yes, this was a great warrior who did not understand that not everyone could be a warrior. It might also be, he said reluctantly, that I need someone to go to the Citadel and search out their archives for what is needed. I do not want to antagonize the Maesters, but their antagonism, there can be no other word towards magic, and legends such as that of the others is not helpful. His words caused Sam Tarsley's eyes to widen to an almost comical extent. Yes, he was that excited at the thought of the Citadel's archives and libraries. That said, he soon got himself under control. As my lord commands, he said with a little bow from his chair, so I shall obey. He looked at them both somberly. "Both of you have important tasks," he said softly, "and House Tyrell will not forget our debt to you on this. I hope that you both understand this." The two Tarleys looked at him, and then shot a glance at each other. When they both looked back at him, then it was as if a peculiar truce had been declared. "Aye, my lord," they said, simultaneously. Jon Arryn. He watched carefully as Bronn gave his report to the small council. He didn't watch Bronn himself, he watched the others. Rhaegar Baratheon was listening to Bronn as he told of the discovery of Lysier, and the young Baratheon had an odd look on his face, as if he was in two minds about something. He worried about Renly sometimes. He had just been a boy at the time of the rebellion, and so large parts of the danger and peril of the time had passed him by. And he'd gone from being a third son to a lord paramount. There were times when he seemed to think that such largesse had fallen into his lap simply because he was Renly. There was a lack of depth to him, at times, that Jon found worrying. And now Renly was staring at Bronn, as if he wasn't quite sure what he was. On the one hand, he seemed almost dismissive of the former sellsword, in his worn black leather riding clothes. On the other, he seemed to be very well aware that this was the man who had tracked down and captured one of the most dangerous men in the realm, a man who had been cheating and stealing under their very noses whilst lying to them all. As for the others, Orton Merryweather was listening to Bronn and nodding somberly, his eyes assessing the other man carefully. He seemed to be the kind of man who weighed and measured a man by his worth. It was good to see. Varys? Well, there was an interesting thing. Watching him could be frustrating at times. It would be like watching a stone that had had a slight smile carved onto it. The man could be an enigma at times. Jon had been watching him at these meetings for years. For the vast majority of those years, Varys had been an enigma. Recently, however, had been slightly different, slightly agitated by his standards, based on what he had observed about the man. Now he had returned to his usual enigmatic behavior. Something had happened, something significant enough to rattle Varys. What? And why the sudden return to normalcy? What had the man decided? Was it connected to Pentos and the death of Mopatis? He knew that the two had once been very close. And then there was Pycelle. He looked almost as conflicted as Renly, divided between what the man looked like and what the man had done. There were times when Pycelle confused him a little. He seemed to be, well, useless at times. But there were those other times when he could ask a disturbingly pertinent question, when he could show a flash of insight. He turned his attention back to Bronn as he finished speaking. The man had, he realized, carefully left out any mention of the letter that Baelish had sent to Lysa. He had, however, given a full account of how he had arrived in King's Landing, asked about Lord Arryn, been sent towards the Great Sept, and intervened in what might have become a disaster. The way that he said it, well, they all nodded and they all muttered their thanks. But he wasn't sure if they really understood Bronn Caxley. The Lord of the Foxhold was someone that he needed to keep close. Why? Because the man was bloody good at anything he turned his hand to. "Thank you, Lord Caxley," Jon said eventually. "Your efforts have been most valuable." "They have indeed," Poso rumbled, with what he might possibly have thought might have been an avuncular smile. "Odd name, Caxley? Where is your family from, originally, my lord?" Bronn shrugged. "All over the place. Although I am told that there was a lordship in our past once." Family tales," Pycelle said, with a rather strained smile. Then he looked down at the piece of parchment that he had apparently been doodling on, and then he looked confused for a moment, before turning as white as a sheet for an instant, before seeming to rally and dismiss what thought had passed through his mind. "A foolish fancy." And then he looked at Jon. "Lord Arryn, should your wife survive the loss of her arm, then she must be brought to trial." Jon sighed tiredly. "Yes, I agree. I like it not, but there can be no other course of action. Not after what she tried to do." "She tried to murder you, Jon," Renly said bleakly. "Baelish got his hooks into her, and, well, she must be tried." "I cannot proclaim justice on my own wife," Jon muttered. "If it does come to a trial, then I would prefer it, if others dealt with it." "That is perfectly understandable, my lord." Varys simpered. "Such a thing would be a most terrible thing to deal with." Jon nodded slowly. He was getting a headache again, and he felt tired. "Very well, Lord Caxley. Please return to the Foxhold and guard my wife until such time as she can be brought to King's Landing for trial. When and if she can travel, send word to me. I will send my men for her. It is the least that I can do. She gave birth to my son." And with that, the meeting broke up. Rosalie went off with Merryweather, talking about a hunting trip, whilst Varys clutched his great book to his chest and then scurried off on noiseless slippered feet. Pyxell blew his cheeks out for a moment and then stood and shuffled off, muttering something about looking at some records. Bronn walked over to Jon, and then after the Grandmaster had passed from sight, he leant forwards a little. That one's trouble. He felt his eyebrows fly upwards. What? Pyxell? The old man's not the dodderer he claims to be. You can see it in his eyes at times, and it's funny how his hunch is a little less severe when he thinks that no one's watching him. His shuffle's a good one, though. Very lifelike. You'd almost think that he was in pain at times. Jon stared at Bronn, and then pinched the bridge of his nose. I see, he sighed. Damn it. He hated this bloody city. So he's been playing the doddering old imbecile for years then. Probably served him well in the rule of the Mad King, Bronn quipped. Made him less of a threat. I should have realized that he was a survivor for a reason. He thought hard and fast. He persuaded Aerys to open the gates of King's Landing to Tywin Lannister's army. I've always suspected that Patyrrell was tied to the Lannisters. I just could never prove it. Don't trust him, my lord. He smiled a little. Oh, I won't, my lord. He reached into a scroll case and pulled one out. I have what you asked for. Bronn took a deep breath and then took it. My thanks. There was an odd look on his face. What's wrong? I'm not sure how she'll react to this. She might give me a clip around the ear for all I know. He placed a hand on the dark-haired man's shoulder. Learn to duck. Jura? Home. He was home. All right, White Harbor wasn't Bear Island, but it was still in the north. He wasn't sure if he should be happy to be home or nervous. There was a fear that was hanging over him. He had always wondered about what he'd do if any of the men that he, sold into slavery, ever escaped or were freed, and then confronted him. There were times when he had nightmares about it. So far, Lyra's reaction had been all that he had hoped for. She was excited about everything she saw, everything she touched, everything she smelt. White Harbor was not Pentos. It would never be Pentos. But it was the biggest settlement in the north, the only place worthy of the title city, and he showed her as much as he could of it as he waited for, he wanted word of his pardon to spread. He didn't want a guard to appear and tell him grimly that Ned Stark was on his way, with ice in one hand and death in his eyes. And then the king had come. He'd been there for a few days now, preparing for the trip to Winterfell, and the city had apparently watched their preparations with some bemusement. It had been many years since a king of Westeros had been seen north of the Neck. Aegon Vu had been the last one, but he had not been a king at the time. And so he kept showing Lyra the city. Edric Stark had left for Winterfell many days before with the heads of the main households who had returned to the north, including Lyra Mormont. Along the way, he'd met several times with Ser Wylis Manderly. Short meetings, just a nod in the street, or a short talk about the ways that the Company of the Rose had picked up in Essos. And once a cup of wine together as Ser Wylis talked about his daughters fondly, as well as his brother's recent decision to marry. It was delicate work, mending a friendship. He'd cursed himself for a fool many times now. Lenonys? Oh, he had been such a fool. It always came down to Lenonys. He wondered what she was doing now, she and her married merchant lover, which was why he was here, now, with Lyra, in front of the heart tree in the wolf's den. It was the first time that the Pentosi girl had ever seen a heart tree, and she stared at it with wonder. It's old, she whispered eventually with a slight shiver. I can tell that it's old, and there's something about it, something odd. There's always something odd about a heart tree, he murmured as he ran a hand over the white bark. The faces, they say that show the many expressions of the old gods. Different people carved the faces. Some of them, not human, not for the oldest of the trees. The children of the forest? Hey, do you think that they are all gone? He frowned a little in thought. I hope not, he said quietly. There are such legends about them, but I really hope that somewhere there's a quiet green place where some of them still live. You sound almost wistful, my love, she smiled at him. For legends? For legends? He smiled back at her. A heart tree. A new voice intruded. A rather familiar voice. How novel. Odd that it's in a place like this. How northern. He got control of himself and then turned. Kingslayer. He remembered that coolly arrogant bastard from Pike. A shame that an iron-born arrow hadn't ruined his good looks. Sir Ivy Lannister smiled cockily at him. Slave Solar, For a moment he saw red, but Lyra grabbed his arm with a grip of iron and shook her head slightly at him. He reined in his temper. "What do you want, Sarhene?" The cool smile twisted for a moment. "His Grace the King wants a word with you, Mormont." At once, Lyra sent a worried look in his direction, and he caressed her cheek for a moment in reassurance. "He's pardoned me," he told her softly. "I have nothing to fear from him." "Of course not," the Kingslayer said sarcastically. "He's just his Grace, the King, Robert Baratheon, the first of his name." He pulled his anger back again. "I will see you back at our quarters," he told her quietly. "Do not worry. I promise you I will see you there." Lyra nodded fearfully and then walked away. He watched her go, and then, as the Kingslayer opened his mouth to say something, he whirled on him. "Lead on, Kingslayer." The bloody man smirked at him. "Oh, are we done being polite? Very well. On to the new castle. Ser Jorah, if you please." He found the King of Westeros in a courtyard in the new castle. He was stripped to the waist, had a log on his shoulders, was sweating like a pig, and seemed to be counting as he staggered around the courtyard. And the word he shouted as he finally rolled the log off and onto the ground was 16 before rubbing his back and groaning. Yarsli eyed Robert Baratheon. The last word that he had heard from King's Landing was that the King of Westeros had gone to seed in the most spectacular way, getting fat, drunk, and chasing every woman in the area who had both tits and a pulse. This was not the man that he had heard about. Yes, he looked heavy-set and seemed to have loose skin for some reason on his stomach, but he looked more muscular than the last time he had seen him, at Pike. Baratheon stuck his head in a bucket of water, pulled it out, and then dried his face on a cloth. Only then did he notice Jorah, and when he did, he straightened up and strode towards him, pulling on a shirt and then a scabbard that contained a huge sword that looked extremely old. Jorah stared in confusion. The Lord of the Warhammer now had a sword. "Mormont," the king rumbled, and Jorah bent the knee at once. When he came back up at the wave of the royal hand, Robert Baratheon then loomed over him, glaring at him. After a long moment, he finally asked, "Was she worth it?" "Who?" Jorah asked, confused. "The Hightower girl. Was she worth what you did?" He thought about it, and then sighed. "I thought so, at the time, Your Grace. Now?" He looked down at his feet for a moment. "No, and now she's in Lice, the mistress of a merchant there. What I thought was love was something that couldn't hold a candle to money." The king glared at him still. "I know that I gave you a pardon," thinking back to Pike. "All the hells, man, what were you thinking?" This time he stared at the face of the king. "I thought that I was in love," he said defiantly. "I needed the coin to keep that love. I was wrong, Your Grace. I was an idiot. I did a terrible thing, something I'll always regret. But I cannot turn back time. All I can do is make amends and move on, as I have done and will keep doing." There was a terrible moment of silent strain, and then Robert Baratheon stopped looming quite so much and nodded slightly. "Fair enough. Very well, can't say more than that. You'll apologize to Ned Stark, though. You met the Targaryen girl, didn't you? What's she like?" Confused by the abrupt change in topic, he stared at the king. Quiet, shy at times, confused. Badly educated. Badly educated. How so? She knew nothing about how damn it, he couldn't say rebellion, how the war against her father started. She knew nothing about how Lord Stark and his eldest son died. Rage awoke in the king's eyes. She knew nothing. Did she? Why did no one tell her when she was growing up? Her brother told her that the war had all been the work of traitors. If anything, the rage redoubled. Traitors! Aye, we were traitors, because we wouldn't bend the knee anymore to a madman who burnt innocent people alive whilst he cackled like a lunatic. He looked back at Jorah. "Did you tell her the truth?" "We did. Lyra and I, she followed me here from Pentos." "And how did the Targaryen girl react?" "She threw up everything she had in her stomach by the side of the road." The king shot him a quizzical gaze. "You'd best tell me the full tale then." And Jorah did, from meeting the Magister to escorting Daenerys Targaryen back up to his manse. "So you met the beggar king then," the king said with an odd look on his face. "And he was crooning over a giant dragon egg. He seemed to be singing to it, Your Grace." "As mad as his father was," the king muttered before eyeing the log again. "Well then, the world is best rid of him. You might have been one of the last to see him alive." Shock roiled through him. He's dead. I did hear rumors at the docks, but... he's dead all right. Went raving mad after you lot set sail. Decided that the best way to hatch that egg of his was with blood magic. Sacrificed a servant first, and then, when that didn't happen, he went even madder and decided that his sister would make a better sacrifice. Knocked her on the head and dragged her into a storeroom. Apparently, that magister you met found them in time. Apparently he was strangling the boy at the same time that the boy was stabbing him with his dagger, and then they both fell into a fire started from a broken lamp. A third of the place went up. Stunned, he stared at the king. That sounded insane. So they all three died? Just the two. The boy and the magister. The girl survived. The boy's egg was a jape on the part of the magister, as it was made of stone, but she had 3 real dragon eggs on her, and they bloody well hatched in the fire that followed. He lifted the log back onto his shoulder with a grunt of effort. There's a war coming, Ser Jorah, and I intend to fight it and win. Wherever the threats come from. Come back tomorrow, by the way. I'm used to the way that Ser Jorah Jaime and Ser Barristan fight after sparring against them with weighted practice swords. I need someone new to fight. We'll pay you for your time. In 2 days we ride for Winterfell. You're coming, you and your girl, from Pentos. And with that, he started to walk around the courtyard again, hefting what looked like a lot of weight on his shoulders. Jorah bowed in farewell, and then left somewhat lightheadedly. Well, dragons in Pentos? Sparring against the king? Why me? Because you're new to him, the Kingslayer grunted as he appeared out of the shadows to one side. Because he's trying to learn something new with the sword every day. Because he's convinced that there's something coming that he needs to fight. He paused, his eyes on something that Jorah couldn't see. He's changed, he said at last. He's changed. And then, in a whisper that Jorah could barely make out, why though? Jorah shrugged and marched out of the gate and into the city beyond. He felt as if he had a purpose again. Robb. It was noon when they finally reached Castle Black. He was more tired than he'd ever felt in his entire life, so tired that he wanted to do nothing more than fall into a bed and sleep for a week. Perhaps, too, Grey Wind had finally woken up from a prolonged nap in the sling by the pommel and was sitting up and watching everything around him with prick-eared fascination. He was also sending the occasional glance back him, almost as if he was worried about Robb. The wall loomed above them. It had started off dominating the horizon and then loomed ever larger as they got closer. Stand on any hill in the New Gift and you could see it, a constant reminder. It seemed to have cast a spell especially over Tyrion Lannister, who could sometimes be found just staring at it and then consulting Lord Surestone's book. Robb had asked him once about just why he was so fascinated by it. Men would not build such a thing unless it was needed. Look at it, it cuts the land in half. How many woods or copses were destroyed so it could be built? How much grazing land? They wouldn't have built it there unless it was needed, and then they maintained it. The Night's Watch has been around for thousands of years, he muttered, waving the book about for a moment. They were given a task. They kept carrying it out for centuries, and the kings in the north made sure that the Night's Watch was made independent of kings and lords, so that it wouldn't get involved in the south and get diverted from its task. Our ancestors, Stark and Lannister alike, knew something. Robb, they knew something. There was a chance that something would one day wake up to the north of the wall. They made plans. But a lot of time has passed, and we have forgotten much. And I somehow need to persuade my cold-hearted, hard-headed father that there is a threat here. That had been a day ago. The Gift and the New Gift were waking up and starting to bloom again. They'd seen the signs for a day or so. Now, fields long left fallow were being cleared of saplings and plowed again, ready for planting. A lot of wood was being stacked in sheds, drying out to be used as firewood. Houses were being refurbished and restored. At one point, in the distance, he saw a small group of men working on replacing the sails on a windmill. I wonder who she was, Jon muttered as they rode towards the headquarters of the Night's Watch. That girl. Robb traded a look with Theon, who smiled slightly, and then rolled his eyes. It might have been a short, red-headed boy. No, it was a girl, moved like a girl. I'm sure of it. A red-headed girl, fascinated by that windmill she was. Robb and Theon rolled their eyes at Jon again, who noticed them. What? No, I'm sure you're right. She was a girl, and you'll meet her. A horn sounded up ahead, and the gates of Castle Black opened before them. Judging from the banners being borne by some of the men inside who were not wearing black, Many of the lords of the north were already there. He could see the rusty long axes of House Dustin, the black horse's head of the Wraithswells, the blue eyes and white caps of the Flints, the black battle-axe of the Serwins, the green merman of the Manderleys, and the silver gauntlet of the Glovers, as well as others. At the head of the assembled throng inside was a broad-shouldered man with thinning white hair and a beard. A raven sat on his shoulder, and he bore a sword that had a bear's head for a pommel. Robb remembered him vaguely from his childhood, before Lord Jeor Mormont decided to abdicate in favor of his son and take the black. The Old Bear, people had called him, and he did look a bit like a bear. As Father dismounted the throng, many of which had been staring in astonishment at Frostfire, knelt swiftly and then stood again. Lord Stark, the white-haired man, said formally, "The Night's Watch welcomes you to Castle Black." "I am honored to accept your welcome, Lord Commander Mormont," Father replied formally. "And I thank the Lords of the North for assembling." And with that he strode forwards and then clasped forehands with the Lord Commander. "Yarke," heard Father say quietly. "You look well. Good to see you again." "You too, Ned," the old bear replied with a smile. "We've a lot to talk about. Your direwolf for a start." "Where's Medjil?" She sent word that she'd been delayed. Something to do with intelligence about some odd events on the frozen shore. "She'll be here in a day or so." Father nodded and then turned to the others in the great courtyard. "My lords, we will meet for urgent council as soon as we are all assembled. House Mormont has been delayed, and I am sure that there are others still to come. I have called you here for a great council, but I have only just arrived, and I must listen to the latest news. Once we are fully assembled, we will talk of many things that must be done. A long winter is upon us. The others have returned. The call has gone out. Someone called out. The old gods have spoken. Aye, they have. And we have much to do. And then Father fell silent. Robb frowned a little, and then looked at Father, who had closed his eyes. And then, suddenly Father opened his eyes again, and Robb could see the red fire. That meant that the old gods were once again present. The sight of it made everyone in that courtyard freeze in shock. And then just before a murmur of wonder could go out, Father spoke again, in a deep and terrible voice. "The North remembers. You have always remembered. But there have been times when you have not remembered the right thing. The wall must hold with the aid of all, as it was when it was built. Old alliances must be remade." Then Father turned his head to one side. "Aemon Targaryen, step forwards." Maester Amin, who had been standing near the old bear, stumbled forwards a step. He seemed to be in shock. Am I being addressed by the old gods?" "You are. We believe in the balance. What has been taken from one person can be restored to another. We have taken the sight from a man who thought he saw the truth, but only saw his own personal greed and gain. You have been blind, but you have seen the truth here at the wall, so we would grant you your sight again." The red fire blazed hotter for a moment, and just for a sliver of a second, something also burnt in the eyes of the old maester, who then gasped as the white in his eyes seemed to vanish, revealing purple eyes. There was another stunned silence, and then Maester Aemon held up a trembling, age-spotted hand. I can see again." The old man said the words with a wonderment and joy mixed with shock. "I can see again." Father closed his eyes again, and when he reopened them, they were normal. Everyone was staring at him, and he blinked and then looked uneasy. Why is everyone looking at me?" Then he saw the beaming, crying, shaking Maester of Castle Black. "What just happened?" "Yaetalin." It was interesting to watch the face of Jory Castle as he stood there in the Godswood and watched his wife to be approached. She was so used to his normal expressions, quiet stoicism, quiet amusement, pugnacious patience, and occasionally, when he was particularly angry, a frozen snarl. He even laughed, like his uncle at times. Today he had a new expression, Pollextox, or boss-outed lover. And to be honest, Anna looked very much the same. She could be hard-faced at times, with every reason to be given her life at times. Lysa, when had she gone so mad? But today there was no hardness in that face, just tenderness, a hint of nerves, and above all love. He was dressed in a fine doublet that his uncle had had made for him, she in a gown that Kat had personally overseen the sewing of. He had unbraided his hair, she had flowers in hers. His cloak was another gift from his uncle. As Jory watched Anna approach him, before the Heart Tree Cat heard a misty little sigh and looked over to where Sansa was watching, with a look of teary longing. "Bless the girl," she needed to talk to her. To one side of Sansa was Arya, who looked as if she had been forcibly stuffed into her dress and then told to smile every now and then. Frankly, it looked more like a rictus than a smile, but at least the child was trying. On the other side of her was the terrible threesome, as Maester Luwin had taken to calling them in a rather long-suffering manner. At least Edric had some manners. She'd had to tell Bran and Robert off twice already for pulling faces. Rickon was having a nap after running about and playing with Fleetfoot until they had both been too tired to stand. Fleetfoot, it had taken massive hints in front of her son before he had finally settled on that name. He'd started off with Shaggy Dog, gone on to Smelly Poop, Big Paw, Ouchie Finger, after some rather rough playing had resulted in a slight nip to Rickon's thumb, and finally settled on Fleetfoot. As Jory and Anna started the wedding ceremony in front of the Heart Tree, and a smiling Maester Luwin, she smiled herself. Those two were lucky to be allowed to marry the person they loved. She had been lucky as well. She had grown to love her quiet wolf, and he to love her. She had heard of far too many marriages amongst nobles that had started in duty and ended in indifference. That said, there was also those that, like hers, had started in duty and gone to love, but not everyone was that lucky. She'd often wondered what would have happened if she'd married Brandon Stark. Ned had told her tales about him. Too much wolf's blood in him, too many wild oats to sow. He had been a hot-blooded, headstrong man, and that had gotten him killed, which had helped to start a war. And that in turn brought up other memories. Oh, pity her. When had that funny, clever, lovely young man gone so wrong? After his challenge to Brandon Stark that had almost gotten him gutted like a fish, after he had been sent away from River Run, when had all that brilliance and wit been subverted into bitterness and greed and cynicism? Had it happened the moment that father had sent him away, or later? She had been wrong about him, and in that other world, that other time, the time that haunted her dreams and still sent her nightmares, her trust in Petyr Baelish had cost Ned his life, and one daughter her freedom, whilst another had vanished into thin air. It had shaken her, and it still shook her. There were times when she found herself overthinking things, and then worrying if she was indeed overthinking the trivial things in life. She had been wrong about so many things in that other time, and people had died in that time, because of her. Yes, it wasn't that simple. Yes, that was a different time and different circumstances, but it still haunted her, and how she had treated Jon still haunted her too. She could have been a mother to him, but she had not, from jealousy and hatred. She owed him a debt of withheld love that could never be repaid, because it was blatantly obvious to her now that Jon would never seek to supplant Robb because they were as close any true-born brothers could be. Her worst fears, born of tales of bastards seeking ideas above their station, no longer applied here. Jon was not a bastard. He was a Stark, and a Stark who wanted nothing more than to be a part of the family and to fight by the side of his brother. There were times when she wanted to weep for her mistakes, but that time was not now. Jory Castle took off his cloak and placed it onto the shoulders of Inanna. The last words were said, and they were husband and wife. And any bedding ceremony would be a very quiet one, as Sierra Roderick had made it very clear that the two were to be left alone to get on with it right fast. Fair enough. As the wedding party, with a giggling Aina being carried by a smiling Jari, moved towards the great hall, she looked to one side. Sansa and Dameric were walking side by side, holding hands, with Septa Mordain following them with a certain look of amusement. Cat smiled slightly. Yes, she needed to assist in their own marriage soon. Right soon, in fact, especially with King Robert approaching. If he had some of the same intentions as in that other terrible future, then he might want to betroth his son to Sansa. That could never happen. She could never see her daughter married to that monstrosity, born of incest. As they entered the great hall, Jory put Aimee back on her feet, and the moment that she saw Cat, she curtsied and then looked solemn. My lady, thank you for honoring us in this fashion, to use the great hall. She smiled. Think nothing of it. The Castles have been loyal beyond words to the Starks. Jory's father died in the service of my husband, and your actions, as well as Jory's, have saved my nephew. He is free of the poison that gave him those shaking fits. This is but a small repayment of what we owe you. Aina curtsied formally and then returned to the arms of her husband, who grinned boyishly at her and then waved at the minstrels, who started up a sprightly tune, and then the Castles began to dance as the assembled men and women cheered. Even Arya smiled a bit at that, and the terrible threesome began to gyrate. Perhaps that was the kindest term to the music. In the middle of the third dance, a guard entered, who waved to Ser Roderick. The master-at-arms frowned in the direst manner and approached the guard, who whispered in his ear. The frown deepened, and then Ser Roderick slipped outside. He returned at the start of the fifth song and approached her. "My lady, a party has arrived. 'Tis Lord Dondarrion and his ward, Lord Dane." She stared at him. Lord Dondarrion, from the Stormlands, and Lord Dane, from Starfall. "Aye, my lady." She looked helplessly at the festivities at the moment, and then shrugged internally. "Very well, let them enter the great hall. But they will approach me quietly. I will have nothing disrupt the wedding." There was a pause, as she waited, her feet tapping to the music, and after a while a small party of men entered and approached her, escorted by Ser Roderick. Their leader was a slight man with red gold hair and a surcoat of a field of stars slashed by a purple lightning bolt. Behind him was a tall, fat, bald man in loose red robes, and then a far younger man with blonde hair and eyes so blue that they were almost purple, with a surcoat that had a white sword and falling star-crossed on lilac. "Lady Stark," the leader said quietly, "I am Lord Dondarrion. I thank you for your hospitality. I was hoping to meet Lord Stark, but I understand that he is at Castle Black at this moment." "Lord Dondarrion, be welcome at Winterfell," she replied. "Yes, my husband is away at the moment. How may I help you?" "Not help me so much as my ward. This is Lord Edric Dane." The young man with the purple eyes bowed deeply. He was as white as a sheet, and he seemed to be trembling. "Lord Stark is truly away?" She frowned a little. "He is. In the meantime, my son Brandon is the Stark in Winterfell." Lord Dane for some reason swallowed almost in relief. Then he bowed again. "My lady..." There was a pause as he seemed to search for the right words for a long moment. "My lady, House Stark sent out the call. House Dane has answered it. I am the Sword of the Morning. I am." His voice wavered for a moment. "I am the last true-born man of House Dane. I have come. I will serve House Stark. I will help to throw back the others and defeat the night." And with that he drew his sword and, holding it upright by the pommel, knelt in front of her. The wedding music stopped dead as everyone looked at her and she stared at the boy. What was going on? And then a gasp went up. Lord Dane's sword was glowing. Ned, as he slumped, there could be no other word for the action, into a chair in the old bear's quarters. There was a glugging noise, and then a mug of ale was thrust into his hands by Jeor Mormont. "Drink," the Lord Commander commanded. "You look like you need it, especially after riding for so long and then having the old gods speak through you." The Lord Commander of the Night's Watch sat down opposite him with a mug of his own and looked at him wryly. "Does this often happen to you, Ned?" Ned took a deep quaff and then sighed. "It's a long story, Gia. Let's just say that the last time it happened, to me at least, an ancestor of mine took control of me, opened a vault in the crypts in Winterfell, and then led my sons and others to the Wolf's Wood, to an ancient god's wood there, where we met her." He pointed at Frostfire, who was lying in front of the fire. Hearing her name, she looked at him for an instant and then looked back at the fire. The old bear stared at him. "I was going to ask about the direwolf. We so seldom see them, and to see one follow you as a pet." "Oh, she's no pet," Ned corrected him. "She and I protect each other. Just as her direwolf pups will protect and be protected by my children. That was the ancient compact. And so it is again. I don't know when we lost the link, but it's been renewed. That must have been the reason for the direwolf head on the banners." There was a short silence as they both looked at the sleepy direwolf. "The old gods are active again, as the legends tell they once were." Jane Gier rumbled, "I don't know if I should be afraid or reassured. It's good to know that they are acting to protect us, but the fact that they had to get involved in the affairs of man scares me. There can be no other reason than that the others have indeed returned." He shivered a little, not that Ned could blame him one bit. "How did the call come to be sent?" "Great John Umber had an artifact that my ancestors gave his ancestors to keep at the last hearth. The Hearthstone, it's called. Simply holding it gave me a vision of the home of the others. A place called Hopearmorn." "Hopearmorn? I've heard of that place. The wildlings speak of it with dread." "They're right, do so, based on what I saw there in my vision. A terrible place, and the Night King is awake there, but I digress. We found a hidden door, my solar, to a place that my father never told me about, and there were other artifacts there, including a stone box with the same marking as on the Hearthstone. When I placed the one inside the other, the call was sent out." There was a short silence. Based on what I've seen, the old bear muttered, it was right that it was sent out. And then there was a knock at the door. Onjira's barked command to enter it opened to reveal Maester Aemon, who bustled in with a book under one arm and a look of intense... Actually, Ned couldn't quite put his finger on what that look was. It seemed to be a combination of excitement, curiosity, sheer joy, and concern. The moment he saw Ned, he stopped and bowed. Lord Stark, he said in acknowledgement, words cannot express the debt that I owe you. Master Aemon, Ned protested. It was the work of the old gods, not me. They spoke through you, and therefore I owe you and them my thanks. He sat down, his book on his lap, and then stared at him with eyes that looked far younger than his face. You have something of the look of your grandfather to you, he said eventually, before smiling suddenly. I remember him well. He was a good man, Ned muttered, although I have few enough memories of him. Maester Aemon nodded, and he looked at him piercingly. Lord Stark, just over a week ago, Mance Rayder sent word to us to parley north of the wall. We, the Lord Commander, Sorlazer Sortorn, Quarn Half-Hand, and myself, rode out to meet with him. He told us a strange take. He and his interesting-sounding Lieutenant Tormund Giantsbane. Aye, he did indeed, the old bear rumbled. Ned, they said that a group of giants had come in, bearing a dying child of the forest. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up on end. One of the children of the forest? Aye. He drank quite a bit of his ale. He wasn't quite sure why he felt such shock, given all the other news about the old gods, giants, the others, and so on. This shouldn't have surprised him, and yet it did. A child of the forest. They have not been seen in centuries. They were sure. They sounded extremely shaken about the whole thing, the Maester said grimly. And then they said something else. They said that it had a message for them, and for us. They said that the others were preparing something by the sea south of the Frostfangs. It also said that Rayder and this Tormund had to go to the Knight's Fort to help a man through what I presume is the Black Gate there, with two others. A man with a golden mind and a boy who died and fell through time, and that their task was to mend the links between magic north and south of the wall. The old Maester was staring at him intently, and no wonder. I hate riddles, the old bear grumped as he got up and poured more ale. How can a boy die and fall through time, and a golden mind? What does that even mean? Ned exchanged a long look with Master Aemon, who raised an eyebrow at him. I can take a guess about the man with the golden mind, he said slowly. Tyrion Lannister came north from Winterfell with us. If any man could be said to have such a mind, it would be him. He's clever and a Lannister of Casterly Rock. The Lord Commander nodded slowly. Which just leaves the boy who died and fell through time. What does that even mean? Ned stood suddenly, walked to the door, and barred it. Then he strode back to where a surprised Jared Mormont was looking at him with both eyebrows raised. Ned, what's wrong? What I am about to tell you is for your ears and your ears alone. Jair, Lord Commander, this is important. He sat down again and then gestured at the Maester. Maester Aemon here already knows about this. It is time that you knew as well. The first time that the old gods intervened was months ago, when they... He paused. This was still something that hurt. When they saved my oldest son, who had died. 'Tis a strange tale, but he died at a time and a place where the North was suffering, when a war was raging that should never have happened. Robb died in our future, a future that will now never happen. And the old gods sent him back to Winterfell, to a point when the war could be, just if things go the way I plan them to go, avoided. The old bear stared at him, stared so intently that he didn't blink. And then he leant back a little. If anyone had said that I would have called him a bloody liar, for you to say it, after all the things that I have heard of and seen with my own eyes and ears, well, I'll not doubt it. So, your son was sent back, and you mentioned a war. The king, Robert, was dead. A hunting accident in dubious circumstances, Robb said. And his son, well, Joffrey must never be king. What's wrong with the boy? He's not Robert's son. That stays within this room as well. If Jiro's eyebrows had been active before, they now threatened to fly off his face, so fast did they move upwards. And then came down into a beetling scowl. Who's the real father? Sir Jaime Lannister. There was a long silence. Then Jadjara drank the last of the ale in his mug with a few gulps and got himself another one. Bloody hell, he said faintly, wiping some sweat off his hadas. So there was a war over the fact that he's a bastard born of incest. There was, and your son lost his part in it. He trusted the wrong people, and that's all I'll say about it. It's a war that will never happen now. At least I hope not. I am planning something to reveal the truth to certain people. Jiro nodded shortly, and what was happening at the wall when all this was happening? From what Robb said that he heard, the Night's Watch was neglected even more. There was word that there had been a great ranging beyond the wall, one that you led. The last reports weren't good. There was another short silence. The others still came then? I think that they did, and the realm was divided and distracted. Jane-Sor sighed before scowling again. Right then, he grumped. We know they're coming. We know that your son and Tyrion Lannister need to go to the Night Fort. Oh, can the Lannister boy be trusted? He can. He knows that the others are coming. He's a clever man, Jatsha. The gods may have jested when they crafted him in his mother's womb. He may have the body of a dwarf. But his mind is another matter. He's brilliant. The old bear nodded slowly. Then Master Aemon and I need to talk to him. We have something that he needs to read. A Lannister once commanded at the Night Fort before it was abandoned. We have his personal journal. And at the end of it, we found a sewn-up leather folder with a name on it. Ned looked at the two older men. They had a very odd look on their faces. What name? Tyrion Lannister. Daenerys, sleeping dragons in their own individual cages in the sun, were adorable. She just wished that she didn't feel like a dragon in a cage as well. There were unsullied guards at the doors, guards that followed her everywhere. The Magisters of Pentos were very polite, very reasonable, as they were always describing themselves as being, but the truth was that they were keeping her as an effective prisoner. The manse was being fully repaired now, work crews swarming over the place as they pulled out burnt joists and installed new ones. The gardens were somehow being restored, with large amounts of fresh water being poured everywhere, and all in all, they were doing amazing work. She would have a splendid cage, one just for her. The Magisters had had a series of loud shouting matches over who was to have the honor of hosting her, and they had finally decided that the best way of preserving internal peace within Pentos was to simply put her up in the manse of the late Illyrio. Along with her dragons, the dragons were very important to them. They'd given her a lot more books about them, but then that was not a particularly good thing, as the books would sometimes contradict each other. The old Valyrians had kept their dragon lore, their true dragon lore, very close to their chests. Sometimes all that the books really had for her was a load of old wives' tales. She sighed, rubbed at the bridge of her nose, and then turned for the table to get a glass of fruit juice. And then she froze. There was a man sitting quietly by the window, a man who had not been there a moment before. He was plump, bald, and had eyes that were almost purple. Good afternoon, the strange man said with a bow of the head. I didn't startle you too much, did I? I apologize if I did. She took a step back. The man wasn't threatening, but he had appeared so unexpectedly that she was taken aback. Who are you? Where did you come from? She looked at the door. Should she call for the guards? The man smiled slightly. The guards know that I'm here. I have visited this place often enough. The Unsullied by your door know the password I used to gain access. So do not be alarmed. As for who I am, my name is Varys. I was a counselor to your late father in King's Landing. The name rang a bell in her mind. Varys, you were my father's spy master. A wince crossed his face. I prefer the term Master of Whispers. A more elegant term than spy master, the latter sounds positively sordid. He paused, and then looked at her. I have very little time here in Pentos, but I thought it important that we meet. I sent you a letter a few weeks ago. I hope that you got it. Daenerys stared at him. That was from you? I needed to warn you not to trust anyone. It was important. It still is important. A long moment passed. After a while, she turned to look at her dragons, and then turned back and stared at him. What do you want? A fleeting smile crossed his face. You don't trust me, nor should you. You do not know me. He stared hard at her. But there are things that you need to know. I trust that you know of your predicament. You are a prisoner here. I know, she said, her voice as hard as she could make it. The Magisters of Pentos wish to use my dragons. Do you know what they call you in the streets of Pentos? Daenerys Stormborn, the mother of dragons, and they speak of you with an odd mix of hope and fear. Hope? That you can help make the conquest of Braavos a bloodless one. Well, bloodless on the part of Pentos, that is, and fear? Dragons, my dear, dragons. Creatures that have not been seen for many a long year, or rather many a long decade. She was about to open her mouth and order him never to call her my dear again, when all of a sudden he stood and strode over on noiseless feet to the window, where he peered out at the harbor. Do you play Scythe? It has yet to make its way over the narrow sea, but it is quite popular in Volantis and Pentos. Confused, she blinked hard. I have heard of it, she said eventually. Viserites was starting to learn it, before the false dragon egg ate his mind. She just couldn't bring herself to say the words. It is a fascinating game, Vera said, as he sent an enigmatic look her way for a moment. The different pieces on a board, the tactics, so many ways of playing. Nobility, love it. But then such people often like to think that life is like just such a game. When it's not, the magisters of Pentos seem to think that they can play Civisas, but with people and companies of sellswords in the place of pieces. The spy master turned to look at her again. For the magisters of Pentos, you have now become a very valuable piece on the board. You and your dragons. They think that you and they can gain for Pentos the streets of Bravos. Nothing can stand against 3 dragons. But it goes further than that, so much further. Do you really think that the magisters will thank you and let you go after that? Lord Yaff, Mir, Tyrush. What about the first daughter, Volantis itself? The magisters will be talking about that. Will they do it? Perhaps, perhaps not. They will talk for a long time over this. But it's the other free cities that worry me. What would they do if they had access to you and your dragons? Simple, conquer the other free cities. So as news of you and your dragons spread, like ripples from a thrown stone into a pond, so will the impact of what people think Pentos will do with you. She stared at him and then shivered a little. You really think that? Oh, I know it. They are dreaming themselves into a second Valyrian freehold, with themselves in charge. Many of the magisters long to become a player in Game of Cities here in Essos, the sequel of the Games of Thrones back in Westeros. They have long had peaceful policies forced upon them, especially by Bravos. This is their chance to break free of them. Her hands shook a little, and she looked over to the cages again. I don't... Bravos is already writing a note of protest. No doubt, as the blurred line between the Iron Bank and the Sea Lord blurs even further. The Bravosi will soon prepare for war. A war of preemption is better than a war of defense. And the other free cities will be watching, waiting, and preparing. He nodded at the harbor again. How many of those ships now preparing to set sail will also be bearing news of you? As I said, a new piece has appeared on the Scyvos board. It is a carved one of you and your 3 baby dragons. Her legs were shaking now, and she stiffened them to disguise it. Despite that, he noticed, bowing slightly and then fetching her a chair, into which she sank. Your pardon, he said gently as he returned to his own seat. But you need to hear the truth on this. I cannot drip honey onto it. It is what it is. She pulled herself together. You think that my very presence here will start a war? She told him harshly. No, you cannot drip honey onto that. Then what do you suggest that I do? A long moment passed as he stared about the room and then closed his eyes and took a deep breath. When he opened his eyes again, there was a look of almost weariness in his eyes. It all depends on what you want to do and what you want to become. I have not addressed you by title this day, because I wonder if you know yourself what you want. I could get you out of the city today. There are at least 4 passages down to the harbor from here, where not a soul would see you. But where would you want to go? Another of the free city, they too would view you as a piece on the Scyvos board. Someone to use. One of the deserted settlements that scatter this region, perhaps. But how long can you hide 3 dragons before you are found? You have some time to decide. Your dragons are young. It will be years before they can be flown by you, let alone control a flame. The danger is that war of preemption on the part of Bravos, or one of the others that I mentioned. But I have sufficient assets to give warning enough to get you out of here. Her 3 dragons were still sleeping in their cages as she looked at them. How long before they outgrew those cages? She looked back at Daenerys. What other options do I have? He shot her an odd look, as if she had surprised him a little. If you mean Westeros, then the plans that Illyrio Mopatis and I were drafting with a few others are gone, for many reasons, not least being the vanishing of the Dothraki. Plans? She asked the word in a baffled tone. What plans? You were to marry the Dothraki horse lord Khal Drogo. Your brother was to marry a mortal of Sunspear. Plans for a rising were being laid down. Approaches to the gold company had been made, and then, in an instant, well, 3 instants, they were all ruined. The Dothraki all vanished to the east. The call was sent out in Westeros, and your brother died in the way that he did. The call? What call? And what was this about Viserys? Her confusion must have been evident on her face, because Varys sighed and then stood and walked over to the nearby cabinet, where he poured 2 goblets of wine. The manner of your brother's death has weakened many loyalist sympathies in Westeros. House Targaryen has few friends there at the moment. Oh, there will always be those ready to rise up and tear down those above them, but the true loyalists, they are weaker now. Varys looked her in the eye. Your father, King Aerys, do you know what they call him? She returned the look. I know, the Mad King. Of course you do, Illyrio said, that someone had been in the library. I owed your father a great debt. He brought me over the narrow sea to be his master of whispers. I did much for him. That said, I saw him every day. You're going to ask me if he really was mad, aren't you? Eventually she nodded. Yes, he said as he sipped his wine and then looked at something on one wall that wasn't actually there as he seemed to shrink a little. He was mad. Paranoia gripped him hard after the defiance of Duskendale. By the time of the great tourney at Harrenhal, he was... well, his hair was long, his nails were long, and his paranoia was even longer. By the end, in the Red Keep, he was a shrieking maniac. He burnt people alive for no reason, and because he was mad, and your brother went mad and tried to kill you, then the overall impression is that you must be mad too. She stared at him and then laughed. I am not mad. No, I can see that. You have something of your mother about you. He smiled almost wistfully. A remarkable woman. She was always dignified, no matter what. Indignities were thrown at her. The smile vanished. Your father could be cruel, and that remains the point. People remember your father. Your eldest brother was infamous for indirectly starting the rebellion, and the manner of your other brother's death is swiftly spreading. My point is that the time is not right for a return to Westeros. Perhaps with time, if the ground can be prepared first. And that in turn is problematic. Something is happening there. Something that I cannot explain. What is it? Is it that call you mentioned? An odd look crossed his face, a combination of bafflement, exasperation, and annoyance, mixed with a well-hidden fear. She'd seen that look once before, on someone talking to Viserys in the hope that he wouldn't be shouted at. The call. It was heard by all of those with the blood of the first men. Magic. A very strong magic. It was heard all over the 7 kingdoms in the most surprising places, and the words heard were all the same. The others come, the Stark calls for aid. You are needed. In Westeros, all eyes are now on Winterfell and the Wall. Crops are being sowed. Homes are being prepared. Roofs mended, walls repaired. The small folk, those that heard the call, all say the same thing. Winter is coming. It will apparently be a long one. It will freeze even as I fear. Something dark is coming. She stared at him intently, trying to riddle out what was in that face. Magic scares you. The merest flicker of the eyes told her that she was right. Magic should scare everyone, he replied, a trifle hoarsely. In my case, I have reason. When I was a child, someone used me for a blood magic rite. I am now a eunuch. As a result, her cheeks flamed with embarrassment, but he held up a plump hand. No matter. I take no offense. You could not have known. Magic has consequences. Nevertheless, the call has been sent out. Something stirs at the Wall, and it has thrown the Game of Thrones there into some degree of confusion. Some seem to have stopped playing it completely, which is bizarre. As a result, even if your dragons were fully grown, an attempt at regaining your father's throne might not be a good idea. With this call echoing in people's ears, well, I do not think that you might have many friends or allies, apart from the Valerians perhaps, and of course Mace Tyrell. It's both a shame and a relief that he's no longer in charge of the Reach. A butterfly could enter one ear and fly out the other unimpeded. She absorbed this with a frown. Then what is your counsel? What should I do? Where should I go? Taking a deep breath, he clasped his hands and then looked at her. That all depends on what you wish to do. As I said earlier, you have some time ahead of you to make a choice. Will you stay in Essos and try and forge your own peace in the game of Cyvasse that the cities are playing? outwitting those who would use you? Or do you return to Westeros and try to somehow survive in a realm that distrusts your family as you try and build its reputation anew? Or should you go somewhere else, like the Summer Isles? It's all upon you to work out what you want to do. All I can do is advise. One thing I would advise for you to do is to write to your great-great-granduncle. Do I have the number of greats right? No matter Aemon Targaryen, you are not alone. You are not the last Targaryen. My brother said that he was old, blind, and useless. If anything, the loss of his eyes has but sharpened his mind. He is by no means useless. He is a fount of advice, and he is the master of Castle Black. Seek his advice. I can guarantee that any letter you send him will reach him undisturbed. You have my word on it. She sat there for what felt like half a year, her thoughts reeling from one thing to another, like a moth caught between several candles. There seemed to be a pressure on her, something that weighed her down. I'm sorry, Varys said softly. This must all have come as a shock to you. But you are the dragon, and the nest has crumbled into nothingness. And now you must spread your wings and learn to fly before the ground rises up and kills you. You have some time. People owe me favors, and I can warn you if you need to move quickly. But you must try and decide in which direction to move. I will write a letter to my great-granduncle, she said eventually. How can I get it to you? I am here in Pentos for a day or so. I can come for it tomorrow. She nodded, and with that he stood, bowed, and walked out on those noiseless feet, leaving her alone with her sleeping dragons and nothing but the sound of the waves far away. Tyrion, if you stood at the base of the wall and then looked straight up, then you got the oddest feeling that you were falling up it. It was all a bit disconcerting. He looked down at his boots, gulped for a bit to try and settle his guts and his nerves, and then stumped off to get a bite to eat. Castle Black seemed to be bustling. What was most interesting was to see all the new stonework or wood or tiles, because they stood out like a sore thumb. He could see at a glance that the castle had been in a mediocre state of repair until a number of months ago, and the number of those months coincided with the cause. He sighed a little and then looked about. Would Father have sent help to a place like this? No, he would not have. Instead, he would have raised an eyebrow at whoever might have had the temerity to suggest it, until that person eventually slunk away, their face crimson with embarrassment, which would have been a mistake. The more he looked at the wall, the more he realized that this was real, that this was not something that even Father could dismiss as just a northern tradition. This was not a tradition. This was something that the first men had built, because there was something on the other side that they had feared. Had Father ever been to the north? No, he had not. Years of being Hand of the King had rather crimped his travel plans, no doubt. What would Father have said if he had ever seen the wall? Would he merely have sniffed and said that it was a creation born of superstitious minds, or would he have seen the immediate flaw with such a thought? Why would the old Star Kings of old have deliberately limited their power? Yes, the north was vast. But if there was a forest to the north, then why give that up? If they had held such a huge area, what was a few leagues more? It was at this point that his progress towards the mess hall was stopped by a skinny young man with black hair dressed in dark red leather armor. He had a rather battered-looking sword at his side, and had an air of... Tyrion wasn't quite sure what he had an air of, but whatever it was, he seemed to have a lot of it. Lord Tyrion Lannister, the Lord Commander, Lord Stark and Master Aemon would like a word with you in the Lord Commander's quarters. He eyed the youth darkly. Will there be food and wine there? This seemed to throw the young man. My lord, I was on my way to the mess hall. I'm hungry. Will the Lord Commander's study have food? A look of deep thought crossed the young man's face. I can get some, my lord. Then do so, please, said Tyrion grumpily, as he stumped his way towards Mormont's quarters. I've ridden a long way, I'm very tired. I've seen the old gods cure someone of blindness. I'm awestruck, and I'll be attending a meeting of the Lord of the North soon, which I thought would involve a lot of shouting, but now... Wait, do I detect the accent of the Westerlands on your words? You do, my lord. There was a pause, and this is your cue to tell me where you are from, lad, and your name. Sorry, my lord. Poderick Payne. He eyed the boy. Payne? Any relation to Sarlin Payne, the tongueless executioner at King's Landing? Poderick Payne turned pink. A distant cousin, my lord. So, what are you doing here? I'm a volunteer, my lord. Another silence. Then, in a rush, I heard the call and I came to help, even though my family thought I was mad, and then he seemed to retreat within himself. Tyrion ran the words through his head, added the necessary spaces between them, and then blinked. You came here from the Westerlands? Yes, my lord. Against your family's wishes? Sort of, my lord. I've heard that a cousin of mine is at the Shadow Tower. Tyrion eyed the boy again. I hate to point out the obvious, but you're a bit young. I still heard the call, my lord. Were you a squire? For my cousin Sir Cedric Payne, my lord. Another cousin. How many cousins have you got? A few, my lord. And is Sir Cedric here? No, my lord. He thought I was a bloody fool. So, whose squire are you now? The lad looked shifty. Night's Watch, don't have squires, my lord. I'm making myself useful. He nodded as he approached the door to Mormont's quarters. So, I see. Get me some bread and ham and a mug of wine or ale and bring it to me here. I have need of a squire and I am a Lannister of Casterly Rock. The lad gave him another oddly unreadable look. Will you be here in the wall for long, my lord? I want to help here. I heard the call. Yes, I know this. Pederick. Such an odd name. I shall call you Poddage. Know this, Pod? I have no plans to leave the north anytime soon. I may stay here for a while, or I might go back to Winterfell, but I shall stay here for the immediate future. There's a lot to do. Now, shoo and get me something to eat and drink. Pod gave him another of those odd looks, and then he nodded and trotted off. Tyrion watched him go quizzically, noting that he seemed to know exactly where to get said food and drink. Then he looked back at the door and knocked politely. A muffled "come" greeted his knock, and he went in, closing the door firmly behind him. This place was cold. He found Stark and Mormont sitting at a table with the maester, whose bright eyes seemed to be jumping all over the place with a not very well hidden delight. As Tyrion approached the empty chair by the table, the old man stared at him fixedly, and then he smiled. Lord Tyrion Lannister, Master Aemon smiled. Be welcome to Castle Black. I trust you are well. Tyrion stepped on the footrest that someone had placed before the chair, and then got onto the chair itself. Well, yes. If a little saddle-sore and hungry, I encountered a lad from the Westerlands outside and asked him to bring food and drink, as otherwise my stomach will meet my spine. Jair Mormont flushed slightly. Apologies, he muttered. I didn't think of that. And with that he stood and poured him a mug of ale, which vanished down his throat in the blink of an eye. My thanks, Lord Commander, he sighed, suppressing a belch. Now, how can I help you? The three men exchanged a long glance, and then Ned Stark rubbed his nose and then looked at him. Tyrek Lannister, Lord Commander of the Night's Watch at the time of the abandonment of the Night Fort, I believe. Yes, I have read of him. What of him? Another pause as the other three looked at each other. We found a bricked-up doorway here, Jair Mormont said reluctantly. In it were many chests, many things from the Night Fort, many things we did not know we ever had. One of those things was the journal of Tyrek Lannister. Excitement flared deep within him. Really? His journal. Fascinating. What did it say? Much about the working of the wall back then, Master Aemon replied. And then there was something else. And with that he pulled out a black leather folder, the edges of which had been stitched together. He placed it on the table and then nudged it towards him. This is for you. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up on end. I'm sorry, what? The maester reached out and then turned the leather object over, and then he saw it. Someone had stitched a name on the outside with faded yellow thread. His name. He reached out with a hand that trembled more than a bit and traced his name on that thread. This is for me? Apparently so, Ned Stark said somberly. You'd best read it. Tyrion swallowed as he picked it up and looked at the worn leather. How could a man who died before the Dance of the Dragons know my name? Perhaps, Master Aemon said softly. You should open it and see. He nodded, pulled out a knife, and then carefully sliced through the thread that had held the folder closed for more than 2 centuries. His heart was thudding in his chest as he pulled the leaves apart. Within were some pages of excellent parchment. He pulled them out carefully and then started to read. My dear Tyrion, I hope that you will not mind the informality of my addressing you as such. You are family after all, and as I am dying, I realize that I not give a damn about formalities. You are a Lannister, as am I. Your first thought will be to ask how I knew your name. There is a simple answer. I have the green sight. I have had it since I was a boy. That is a thread that connects us. I know that you are short in stature, but great in mind. How do I know that? I dreamt it. You sit in a room. In that room sit a lion, a direwolf. Literally, a bear and a dragon As I said, I have dreamt it. I know that your father scorns you for your short stature. My own father scorned me for my dreams. My mother understood. She was a Blackwood. But my father never did. Not until towards the end of his life. The green side is both a blessing and a curse. It is a blessing because 3 times in my life I have seen disaster approach and been able to steer around it. A curse because I know what lies ahead of me for the Night's Watch. The abandonment of the Night Fort was just the start. The Night's Watch will fall further, fall to its lowest ebb ever. If you are reading this now, then one of 2 futures has been fulfilled. I will not mention the other as you would wince a lot. I know what lies ahead for you. It will be a difficult path. You must trust your heart and your head if you are to negotiate what lies ahead. A second long night comes, as is feared. You must go to the Night Fort. I know that this is macabre. But seek out the crypt where I have ordered that I will be buried. You will find something of ours there. Some things that the Lannisters, or should I say Casterleys, of old had forgotten about. I found them deep in an old storeroom when I was a lad, driven there by the green sight, used them well. There's another crypt there. The source of dark legends, take a Stark with you. The Half-Tully, perhaps. Don't start too much when you meet various guests there. The first will be unwelcome. The second set will be most welcome to you. Indeed. There's a man on the other side of the Black Gate. See him for what he truly is. Watch out for late wolves. After that, follow your heart, be sensible though, the moments of pain, and realize when you need to grasp that moment of happiness. Be well, distant nephew, fight the long night that is to come. Tarek Lannister. As he placed the letter down in a slight daze and then pushed it across the table towards the others, there was a knock on the door that heralded the entry of his new squire with a plate of bread and ham, and a goblet of actual wine. It vanished in the blink of an eye. The wall was interesting. It certainly was impressive. It was hard to look at it and not feel your mind whirl at the very size of it. This was something that men built for one reason, fear. They had been afraid of something. Something terrible. Robb and the others were watching some of the new recruits to the Night's Watch spar, watched over by a thin, grim-looking man with black hair that was flecked with gray. He looked vaguely disgruntled, as if he wanted to complain but couldn't. The men in the courtyard held their swords well and seemed to know what to do with them. But it was the way that they seemed to be swinging them against the targets in front of them. The sacks stuffed with straw, with sticks for arms and legs, that was interesting. They weren't trying to kill them. They were trying to dismember. They're training to fight whites, Robb muttered next to him, and he nodded as he, too, made the connection. Then his brother, he had to keep thinking of Robb like that. He just had to, nodded at the man overseeing the men from the Night's Watch. That's Sir Ozzer Torn, Master-at-Arms at Castle Black. He'd heard about Sir Ozzer. The man had been a Targaryen loyalist, taking the Black when offered a choice between that and the headsman's axe. Swing at the joints, Sir Raditer roared, making them all jump a little. When the others come, they'll send whites against the wall. Dead men, dead women, dead children. You can't fucking flinch. You dare not. Flinch and you'll be dead and raised as one of them. Dismember the twats, cut their arms off, cut their legs off, smash their heads in. They're already dead. Make them deader. That just leave the others themselves, Robb muttered. And steel can't kill them. Archers can, Theon replied from the other side of Robb. Arrows with dragonglass. Send enough of them in the air. This won't be a war with room for strategy, Robb said with a grimace. We hold the wall. That's it. We hold the wall or we all die. He looked back down again at the men in the courtyard as they swung at the targets, and then he saw the look of what seemed to be conflicted anger that Sir Ozzer Thorn was sending at Robb and himself. He seemed to know who they were. He also seemed to be both angry at them and grateful. It was a very odd expression. Why is that man looking as if he's happy that something curdled in front of him? Theowen asked. That's Sir Ozzer Thorn. Robb muttered. He was a loyalist in the rebellion. It was the Night's Watch or death. Theon frowned a little. So why the funny frown? Father and Robert won the war, so he hates Father for him being here, and by extension us. But at the same time, Father's brought a lot of help to the wall. Do you see all the repairs and the new storehouses? Robb had a good point. He looked about the place. It was old, but some parts looked newly repaired, and judging by the fact that some men were busy replacing a section of walkway with new boards, the repairs really needed to be done quite urgently to stop people from falling through broken sections. Hearing the sound of boots to one side, he turned his head. Tyrion Lannister was standing there, looking at the courtyard. He too had an odd expression on his face, but this one was more the look of a man who had just been walloped over the back of the head with a branch. After a moment, he seemed to shake himself a little, and then wandered off, obviously deep in thought. And then Maester Aemon stepped out and stood there, his fingers dancing on the guardrail. The moment he saw Jon and Robb, his eyes lit up and he walked over to them. "Ah, you must be young, Robb, and Jon Stark, and Theon Greyjoy, I presume. Yes, you all bear the look of your forebears. Being able to see you is a blessing that I can never thank Lord Stark for." "I am heartily glad that you can see us, Maester Aemon," Robb said, with a smile. "Is my father still talking with the Lord Commander?" "He is. You must go and talk to him. In the meantime, I must return to my library. I have a lot of books to read." He turned away for a moment and then turned back. "Young Jon, you have strong arms. May I borrow you for a short time? There might be books that I cannot reach, and my assistant is being drilled in fighting whites by Saralisser." "Of course, Maester Aemon." Jon smiled as he walked up to the old man. "Lead the way." The Maester of Castle Black did and led the way, his gait combining both age and the fact that he could see what must have been a memorized route for the first time in years. As they entered the library, the Maester looked about as if greeting old friends again for the first time in many years, which was probably quite true. The Maester was also looking about the place, and as he sat down in a chair, he gestured at the door. "If you wouldn't mind locking the door, I don't see anyone else in here, but please check the back areas as well." He locked the door and then walked quickly around the large room. No one was there, and he returned to the fire, and sat down as Maester Aemon gestured at the chair opposite. And then the old man just sat and stared at him as he was trying to memorize every part of his face. "You have to excuse the imagination of an old man, whose fondest relatives have long since passed from this world," he said, eventually in a low and rather emotional voice. "But I do see a little of my own family in you. It's the set of the shoulders, the set of the jaw, and the look in your eyes, subtle touches, overwhelmed by the look of the Starks. And I thank the gods for the latter. My brother Aegon hid his looks by shaving his head. You do not need to." He tilted his head to one side a little and looked at him again. "You do remind me of him. I think that he would have liked you. He was an unusual man, for the best of reasons. He saw things differently from the rest of us. He knew the small folk, and they loved him for it." Feeling more than a little lost, Jon nodded slowly. "It's good to see you again, Master Aemon." A bright smile crossed the face of his great-great-granduncle. "And it is with very great pleasure that I can see you now. Jon Snow." "Ah, wait. I hear that King Robert has legitimized you." "He has. I am Jon Stark now." A look that combined sadness with satisfaction crossed the Maester's face. "It is good that you are embraced by your family now. You will always have a difficult path before you. You must live in a world where there are those who would kill you merely because of your blood. Has Lord Stark discussed a plan with you yet?" He nodded slightly. "We have talked briefly on it. I would found a cadet branch to House Stark, be a bannerman to father and then to Robb. That's all I've ever wanted. A hold, a wife, a family." The Maester of Castle Black looked at him for a long moment and then nodded as if satisfied. "A good plan. A safe plan. You're not disappointed." "Disappointed?" Maester Aemon's eyebrows flew upwards for a moment. Nay, I have lived through 3 Blackfire rebellions, and the War of the Ninepenny Kings, when the last legitimate member of that unhappy house was finally killed. I have seen the consequences of great ambition, death, and ruin. All you wish is to live and not be a threat. That is laudable. What you teach your yet unborn children, well, that is up to you. But you must think on it most carefully. No false pride. You have the example of both Grey Stark and Blackfire to show you the consequences of such pride." He shivered a little. "I had thought of that," he said in a low voice. "I just want to be a Stark, and be a threat to no one. Just to be loyal to House Stark. To Robb. We are brothers." Maester Aemon looked at him again. That same intent look. "Good," he said eventually. "Let go of the boy that was Jon Snow. Kill the boy. Forget him. Become the man that will be Jon Stark. Work towards your goal. Live, Jon Stark, and think of a name for your cadet branch that has meaning, because there is a long winter ahead of us, and those with the blood of dragons will play their part in what is to come. He seemed to shiver for a moment. "I do not have dreaming of our ancestors, but a foretelling is on me, young John. You have a key part to play, you and your cousins. Your aunt too, I think. You must all be ready for what is to come." A silence fell as John eyed the old man with both wonder and fear. After a long moment, the maester shook himself a little. "Your pardon. Such a feeling has not been on me for many a year. You must become used to it. Lord Stark himself was possessed by the old gods, and has restored my sight, after all. Now, I need you to unbolt that door and fetch me some books. I spoke truthfully when I said that I needed your help in that we all shrink as we age." John stood and took a step towards the door, but then stopped dead. "Nay, Meister Aemon, you have not shrunk. You are greater than you think, and I will heed every word of your advice." And then he strode off to unlock the door. "Arya!" She stared Nymeria in the eyes. Sadly, Nymeria had eyes only for the remains of the lamb chop on her plate and would not look back at her. "You," said with a combination of disgust and affection, "are nothing more than a walking belly." The direwolf sent her a brief look that seemed to be amused, and then went back to staring fixedly at the chop. She placed the chop in front of her face and then tried to look into Nymeria's eyes. It didn't work. Instead, her direwolf merely stared even harder at the chop, even harder. After a moment, she started to drool. Eventually, she admitted defeat, and once she was sure that Mother wasn't looking in her direction, she placed the chop under her chair. There was a dart and a shonk noise, followed by the sound of the chop surrendering to young Jaws. Ray sighed a little. Young Warge, the old gods that had possessed John, has called her. But she still didn't know how to be a Warge. How could she start to learn to be a Warge if she had no idea where to even start? She yawned. Her dreams had been a bit odd lately. She kept dreaming about walking down the halls of Winterfell. The odd thing was that she seemed to be the same height as the imp. Perhaps she was dreaming about being as old as Rickon again. That was odd. Something that was also odd was the thought of having a new brother or sister again. She'd barely gotten used to Rickon being able to speak in baby babble, and now she was going to have to go through it all again. A sigh emerged as she looked about the great hall. Life could be so unfair at times. At least they had some interesting company. Lord Dondarrion had the most interesting personal sigil that Bran had ever heard of. She had to admit that it was quite interesting. All those lightning bolts. He was also very popular. Jane Poole was smitten by him, whatever that meant, and Daenerys and the terrible threesome certainly liked to talk to him. Sansa would sit to one side, not far from Daenerys, and listen with a slight smile on her face. "He's a knightly man," she had explained to Arya the previous day. "Daenerys says that he's a good man who know what a good lord must be kind to his people." And then there was Thoros of Myr, the large, tall man who wore the red robes of a priest of some kind of red god. She wasn't sure exactly what kind of a god had to be on fire all the time, but Thoros was a priest of his. He was very fond of wine, liked the kind of stories that would make Sora Roger Castle roar and Mother glare, and was kind in a head-patting way that made her want to bite his hand. Oh, and there was Lord Dane. Now, he fascinated her. He was small, had blonde hair and very blue eyes, and there was something about him that annoyed her. He seemed vaguely familiar, but she didn't know why. He was Robb's age, apparently, which surprised her, given how he was smaller than Robb. She'd asked him about that. "My mother was not well after I was born," was all that he'd pretty much say, with an odd look on his face. "I'll grow, I've been told. I'll grow." And that odd look would cross his face again. Urzia looked at Lord Dane again. He seemed to be eating yet again, and he also seemed to have taken on that look that Robb had gotten just before his growth spurt recently. He also had that peculiar hunted look whenever Mother was around. Well, at least he wasn't wearing that sword again. There was something about it that set her teeth on edge. The thought that Lord Dane's uncle had tried to kill Father with it, and that Lord Dane had been named Ned in honor of Father because he had returned Dawn, and also Sir Arthur Dane's bones, to Starfall afterwards. Well, something felt a bit off there. A bit strange. Jari and Anna weren't there again today. She didn't really want to know what they were up to. Old Nan had said a lot of things about there being a baby expected there quite soon. She shuddered. Why did grown-ups have to be so disgusting? Dinner wended its way to a close. Thoros and Sir Roderick went off somewhere to find some more ale. Lord Dane retired to the God's Wood to pray. Lord Dondarrion went off to talk horses with Daenerys, and the various others all broke apart. Mother had a quiet word with her about not feeding Nymeria at the table. How had she known? And then she was off back to her room, Nymeria padding after her. She was quite tired. It had been a long day. But as she snuggled into bed, with Nymeria sprawled out on the bed next to her, she still felt that annoyed irritation that she hadn't been able to break through and warg into Nymeria. The dream started oddly. She was walking in the Godswood, walking up to the heart tree in the moonlight, and that was odd because there was no moon that night. The place was lit by a silvery half-light, and by it she could see other figures around it. Sansa was there, asleep by the trunk, with Rick in a restless little bundle next to her. To one side, she could see two vague shadows that looked familiar. But they looked odd, as if they were there, but also very far away. And then there was Bran. He was sitting bolt upright and staring at the face carved into the heart tree. After a moment, he looked at her and smiled slightly, before going back to staring at the tree. This was a very dull and boring way to behave. But for some reason, she felt herself sitting down and also staring at the face. It was a melancholy one. It had always been that way, and always would be that way. Until now, because all of a sudden its eyes seemed to open and it smiled at her. She stared at it, not in terror, but in fascination. A wind picked up, and for a moment the leaves rustled together like hands clasping at each other, whilst far, far away she seemed to hear a voice shouting her name for a moment. And then she heard it. "Little warg, who are you?" She wanted to shout the words, but instead all she seemed to be able to do was whisper, "You know who we are, little warg. You have heard our voice before. It is time for you to hear it again." But I'm not a warg. I keep trying and failing. She could see Bran next to her, also whispering something that she couldn't make out. "You have tried. Who is to say that you have failed?" She frowned. "You're speaking in riddles. I hate riddles." The voice seemed to both sigh and laugh. Starks. Always to the stark truth. "Open your third eye, little warg. You and the others must open your third eye." "But I've only got two eyes." "Your third eye is in your mind. You dream with it. You use it now. So let us see what you can see." And suddenly she was back in her bed. Or was she? She didn't have a pillow under her head, and there were no blankets over her. Where was she? She stood up, and then stopped. Things felt odd. Very odd. She was in her room, but her balance was off, strange, wrong. And then she stopped, dead. There was someone in her bed. She stepped forward, somehow lost count of how many legs she had, and sprawled on the bed, on the figure under the covers. The figure didn't move, but looked familiar by the light of the guttering candle that she'd forgotten to put out. She peered at it. She noticed that she had a muzzle at about the same time that she saw that the figure was her, motionless and with eyes that were the color of milk. At which point she suddenly woke all the way up with a shriek that was part excitement and part terror.